Welcome to Sports Econ 101, the show where we discuss sports topics from a business perspective. I'm your host, Edward Brown, along with my co-host, Russell Jackman. At each commercial break, we're going to ask a sports trivia question. And since football season is upon us, coming next week, it'll be the NFC. And also in the next segment, we're going to introduce our special guest who has been on at least once before, a few years ago, former director of college scouting for the Raiders. You have to say it that way, right? Like, was that Chris Berman who used to say, who would say that? Jon Kingdon. And when we come back, John's going to share with us a lot of fun stories and what's it like to be a director of college scouting, and what he's doing nowadays. Because when we think of scouting, we always think of just college, and I guess that's what John did. But there's also the scouting that goes between pro teams when they're looking, I guess, in case a player gets hurt and that sort of thing. And the 49ers trading Trey Lance. I guess now that they got Sam Darnold, they don't need Lance. So it's kind of interesting. We'll actually talk to John about that. Be kind of cool. And Russell, you're going to have some great questions for John.
We'll see what he comes up with.
Yeah, because
we'll see what Russell comes up with too.
We'll see what Russell comes, because John, you were pretty close to Al Davis, right?
Very closely, and as I mentioned, Bruce Kebrick and I, we co-authored a book, Al Davis Behind the Raider Shield.
Yeah, very good. All right. Also, I think it was kind of cool. This isn't football, but a little baseball. So Mookie Betts, he got a standing ovation from the Boston. Holy smokes. I don't know why that's coming on. Mookie Betts got a standing ovation from the Boston crowd. It was the first time that he had been playing for the Dodgers the last 3 years. And when he went back to Boston, they treated him like a star, and which is really kind of cool, because the team traded him versus a player who wants out and usually gets booed. So, all right, stay with us. You're listening to Sports Econ 101. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Russell Jackman. I want to introduce our special guest, Jon Kingdon, who's a former director of college scouting for the Raiders. And John has been on before. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101.
Thank you, Edward. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Good. Okay, so tell us, give us a little history. How did you get started in being? I assume you didn't start off as being a director. You probably started off as a college scout and then moved up.
Well, even less than that. I came in as an intern. I had gone to UMass and got a master's in sports management and needed an internship to get the degree. And I started out picking up players, picking up lunches, excuse me, things like that, and just kind of worked my way in a department where doing all the administrative stuff and doing all the filing. And Ron Wolf was the director of scouting, and he gave me the opportunity to start going out to some schools locally, and then eventually got an area to scout, and then just kind of kept working my way up. And when Ron eventually left and went to the New York Jets, and then ultimately to the Green Bay Packers, I had stepped in, along with Bruce Kebrick. We kind of worked together as the college scouting directors.
So how does one tell whether you're a good scout or not until after it's proven that you're a good scout?
I mean? You can't. It doesn't come to me. Obviously, you can evaluate. People are evaluating the drafts the day after. Well, that's simple. It takes about 2, 3, maybe 4 years to really evaluate how good you did in your draft. Now, if you're cutting players you drafted fairly highly pretty quickly, that's not a good sign. And we would evaluate our own scouts, about how well they did. And some who were we had one in particular, a former player who wasn't very good, but was somebody that Al really liked and had been a nice player. And I won't say it was, but we realized he's not going to find any players. So we always had to double check what he was doing, that kind of thing. But it's almost black and white. If your players are making it, it's not really black. It's black, gray, and white. A guy's a great player, or a guy's a solid player, or a guy is become maybe a good special teams player and such, or flat out if he doesn't make it. If you see soon that he hadn't made it, well, that's just a pretty good sign that that wasn't a good pick or overall a good draft.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of personality stuff involved too. I think about guys who, let's say, were good NBA players, but they didn't make NBA coaches very well. You would think that a player would be able to know how to scout another player.
Well, you're talking about as coaches, I think, the example I would always use was Dan Reeves, who played for the Cowboys for a lot of years
Oh,
and
yeah.
wasn't a great talent, but I think he knew how to use his abilities and really worked hard to become a good player and such. And I think he carried that over to become a very good coach. Bill Parcells played at Wichita. Wasn't a great player, but again, I think he loved the game so much instead he became a good coach, that kind of thing. The great players, Forrest Gregg was okay, but nothing special. And you can come up with other names like that. Jim Zorn, wasn't very good. And again, any number of, I'll be honest, Art Shell, a great player,
Yeah.
was not a really particularly good coach. Now we had
Yeah.
some pretty good teams and we made it to the playoffs and such, but when the talent kind of dropped a little bit there, he got exposed. So I think it's the okay players that really love the game and want to hang out. Again, the guy who's now the coordinator with the Chargers played at Boise State, was a quarterback, and was drafted by Detroit and kicked around a little bit and was the coordinator with the Cowboys. He's now with the Chargers and got a lot of his name was brought up very prominently to be a head coach and got the interviews. And eventually that's going to happen. I kind of blank.
Yeah, I can imagine, I think about, let's say, like someone like Michael Jordan, when you're at that caliber, you probably get very frustrated if people don't play up to your expectation. So someone like Art Shell, who was, I believe he was a Hall of Famer. If I'm
Question of Hall of Fame, absolute Hall of Famer.
Yeah. So, he's probably expecting everybody to, hey, if I can do it, you should be able to do it. If you don't,
Well, Michael Jordan again was not good at what he did as a general manager, and yet he just sold his share in the Carolina team for like $2 billion. So who am I to be critical of him?
Well, he was a good businessman from that end of it.
No, and an amazing player. I mean, I'm not
of course.
For a second. Question.
So what things do you look for in an athlete that makes you feel that, obviously you're looking for positional skills. What things that sets an athlete apart that makes you say, I want to take him, whether he's offensive or defensive?
Well, when I first started, I asked Ron Wolf, what, basically what is, what do you look for? And he says, look, the bottom line is, can they play? I mean, that he says, I'm oversimplifying it and such, but each position, had position specifics that you were looking at, the offensive linemen, the ability to use their arms, the ability to use their feet, to change direction, to leverage, all of those things. And you put it all together, and if they're playing well, they are. That's certainly the first thing you're looking at. You're also looking at character. Has become more and more important in the league. It wasn't quite that bad back when, but then with drugs and steroids and all these other things, character became a much more important thing to really include in your reports. We also had size and speed requirements. Those are things, obviously the speed, particularly with Al, which I think he overemphasized in a lot of ways. But so I guess the bottom line, you start off with size and speed, and then you got guys that aren't quite that big, but just have explosion in the way that they play. Marcus Allen's another example. We never told him. Marcus ran like a 4.7 for us, which if we had reported, it's only twice in all the years I was there, we put down a different time than what guys ran, because if we put that time down, Al wouldn't even look at the guys. So we moved Marcus up to a 4.6, which again was right on the edge. But Marcus played so much faster than his 4.6 time. He had the ability to cut without having to gather himself, and all the other, not just intangible. Mark was a great receiver. He was a great blocker. He was a great passer. He was a quarterback in high school. We used him a ton of times, and he was a great short yardage runner, whether going under the line, through the line, or over the line. So you put all those factors together, and he just obviously was a great player and a great leader and such. So
Well, I could just mention like the tight ends, like George Kittle, the great blockers, because, tight end, you got to look at for blocking also.
Well, that was actually another position we used a lot of projections. We, being Al, Dave Casper actually originally was a tackle at Notre Dame, and then became a tight end and was great. But we had Ethan Horton came in, had been a first round running back with the Chiefs out of North Carolina. We made him a tight end. He made the Pro Bowl. Derek Ramsey was a quarterback at the University of Kentucky and played tight end, was really a good tight end. A few others like that.
Hey guys, we're going to
have
go
a question. I have a
Hey,
question.
Russell, can you hold off on that? Remember
Yes,
your
I
question?
will.
We're going to go to a break. And by the way, with the character thing, I keep thinking about guys like John Matuzak, and it's almost like, we don't care what kind of character you are. You're 6'8", 300 pounds. You do whatever you need to do,
Sure.
Okay, here's our first trivia question on the NFC. And as a reminder to John, don't answer it until we come back in case you know the answer. All right. What longtime NFL player and coach and NFC team owner also served as the NFC's president? Okay, what longtime NFL player and coach and NFC team owner also served as the NFC's president? All right, we're talking about the National Football Conference. All right, stay with us. You're listening to Sports Econ 101. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, along with Russell Jackman and our special guest, Jon Kingdon. First trivia question: what longtime NFL player and coach and NFC team owner also served as the NFC's president?
Tagliabue?
No?
Well, basically the only I was thinking Paul Brown. I know, but I don't know that he was a player. But the only one I would think of would be George Halas.
That's it, George Halas. Yeah, you got to go way back for him.
Yeah.
I guess he played what, in the 1920s, 30s?
I don't even remember him as a player, but I was thinking owners. You got Al Davis, you got Paul Brown, and the other one that had real football experience would have been Halas. So, and I know that Paul Brown and Al didn't play pro football.
No. All right, go ahead, Russell. You had a question for John.
Yeah. So we were talking about, Marcus Allen, and to me, that was one of the great mistakes by Al Davis, was putting Marcus Allen on the bench for so many years when he really should have been starting and should have been an impact player. And so, that's something that I don't know if anyone's ever really gotten to the bottom of, is why Al Davis chose to cut his own nose off to spite his face and would not trade Marcus Allen, but also wouldn't play him. And did you ever, as a say, get that guy in here because he's one of the phenomenal players of our era?
Well, it's actually a question I get asked a great deal. First, it wasn't many years. I think it was like 2 to 3 years, which is still 2 to 3 years too many. Because Marcus, as I've said, was amazing, and I got to know Marcus pretty well, and just love the guy. One of my most favorite players. I think, and we have I mentioned we wrote our book, Bruce and I, Al Davis Behind the Rose Shield, and we had a chapter in there about Al having problems with 3 people, essentially, that he shouldn't have. One was Kenny Stabler, one was Marcus, and one was Gruden. And the thing I thought we saw that they had all in common was they were becoming the face of the organization. And I think that bothered Al, and it made no sense. Now, he was still playing Marcus. And here's something people don't quite remember. I think he was looking for an excuse to kind of play him less. And you won't really remember this, but 1986 was like when we're playing the Philadelphia. That season was a crazy year. We lost our first 3. We won our next 5. Next thing you know, we're 8-5, and we're looking to, get ready to get into the playoffs. We're playing the Philadelphia Eagles, and it's in overtime. And we're in a position where just run 1 or 2 more plays, kick the field goal, we win the game, we'll be 9-5 and go on. And we're going to run it one more time. And Marcus broke to the outside, very competitive, and the ball popped up in the air, and a Philly guy picked it up and ran it down and Dokie Williams made an amazing play to tackle him at the 1, and then Cunningham ran on the next play. And I really think that Al kind of used that as an excuse now. All right, well, he fumbled. We're going to start. And we brought in Dickerson, and we brought in Roger Craig, and he drafted a guy, Vance Mueller, from Occidental that he actually started, which was insane. And then what really kind of burned the bridges for everybody was when Marcus went on national TV with Al Michaels before a Monday night game and did an interview where Al's trying to sabotage my career. And, that was the end of that. But, that's as close as I can get to it. And that's not going to be one of those things where you say to Al, what the hell were you thinking? I mean, it wouldn't have worked in that sense, but and I agree with Russ, you're absolutely right. It truly made no sense. And, there was another incident that occurred that I'll share. He had asked Terry Rubisky, who was our offensive coordinator, and he said, I want you to go on TV and say that Marcus is lying about this and this and this. And Terry wouldn't do it. He says, look, I'm dealing with the players. I just don't think that's right. And he got Art Shell to do it. And I actually got Marcus Allen's autobiography. And it was a very interesting book because he had other players talk about their time with the Raiders. And Ronnie Lott had a section in there. And he talked about how disappointed the players were in Art Shell that he went out and attacked Marcus at the behest of Al. And he lost a lot of support from his players that way. And whereas Terry, saw that this wasn't the right thing to do, and he did it. So I hope I answered as best as I could, without saying to Al, really, what the hell was the matter with you to have a problem with this guy?
Well, I think going back to the scouting part, I think about probably just off the top of my head, one of the best scouting reports or draft picks has to be Ray Guy. I mean, who picks a punter first round, and yet it was the best one.
Well, the same team that picked a kicker in the first round, Sebastian Janikowski.
Yeah.
No, but that was absolutely, and that was before I was there.
Yeah.
Absolutely, so it turned out, and I was probably in high school when they drafted Ray that way, but I'm sure the papers were, what the heck? You can get them anywhere. But just when we took Sebastian in the first round, everyone said, oh, you could have gotten him in the second round, but I think the Chicago Bears had like the second pick in the second round, and they came out and said, well, we were going to take him in the second round, and not wanting to get away from Ray, but when we had gone through a whole series of bad kickers after we had let Jeff Jager go. And like the year before we drafted Sebastian, we did not have a good year with our kickers. And I remember talking to Kent McLuhan, again, going back, he was a great cornerback with us and he was a great scout. And I said to Kent, if we could draft a guy in the first round and we would have won, and if we had him the year before, we would have won 4 more games than we won that year. Would you draft that guy? And he said, is that a trick question? And I said, in a sense it is. He says, well, yeah, I would draft him. I said, well, there's a kicker. So, the guy named Sebastian Janikowski, that if we had him last year, because we lost 4 games because of our kickers. And we ended up taking Sebastian. And the ironically, John Gruden was our coach, and John was very offensive oriented. And there was a player named Sylvester Morris, who was a receiver out of Tennessee State, who nobody remember. Yeah. And John really wanted to take him because he was very, like I said, offensive oriented. But we took Sebastian, and Sylvester went 2 picks later to the Chiefs. And you talk about injuries, he blew his knee out in his rookie year and never made it. But Ray just changed the game, changed the field position, and he was a great athlete.
Yeah.
And he was actually, I mean, he could throw. He had the strongest arm on the team. He did all those things. He was a great baseball player. And just as a Ray Guy story, if you remember, in 1984, we were playing the Chicago Bears in a game that people said was the toughest, most vicious game ever in football. We had won the Super Bowl. The Bears were just about to be what the Bears became back in that decade. So we were playing on the road, and they were going to show how tough they were. And we were still a very good team. Jim Plunkett didn't dress because he had some injury. So Mark Wilson is playing, and Mark, and they're running that, that blitz that people are having trouble covering. So Mark gets hit and he hurts his thumb. They take him to the locker room, and David Hum comes in, and David loved playing. He's out there and he's moving the team, bing, 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 and he gets clobbered, top and low, and he's just laying there. And Mark's in the locker room, and who's our third quarterback? Ray Guy. And so I thought Ray says, I'm not going in there. But so it took a while because and I guess someone called to Mark Wilson and said, we got to have you out there. And so, we've talked about it. And David Hum passed away a couple of years ago. And I went, he had MS, which is really sad,
no.
but I got to be very close with him. And so at his memorial, I was sitting there with Steve Sylvester, a former player, and Bob Nelson, and they were telling David Hum stories and that whole incident. And so David's laying there on the ground, and George Anderson, trainer, says, you ready to get up, David? Can I lay here a little longer? And then I was talking to Jim Plunkett. He'd come in, and I told him these stories. He said, I got one, because he's on the sideline. And he thinks he's going to go back in. And he says, hey, Plunk, could you hold this for me? He says, sure. What's that? And he pulls out like 3 teeth out of his mouth.
Oh, no.
But they said, he's not going in. And, but anyway, so, and then Bob Nelson said they're on the plane, and David's sitting there sipping a beer. And he's, oh, Bob, I was having so much fun out there, because he truly loved to play. And just the last, anyway, he had like 6 surgeries off of that thing with knees and this and that, and he's not going to be able to come back the next year at all. But just another side story. So he's in Las Vegas, and my sister was a graphic artist, and she said, I'm thinking about moving to Las Vegas because there'd be a lot of work there. I said, I know a guy in Las Vegas. So this was the next year after that game, and it's in the spring. I'm sorry, it's during the season. And I call up David, and I used to be the one to call David. David, we need you, come on back. David, we need you, come on back. So I said, hey, David, Jon Kingdon. And there's no sound. I said, do you want to take a break, or I'll be quick? So I said, David, he says, are you there? He says, yeah. I said, well, my sister's coming to town. She's looking for a job. Could you get some interviews? He said, oh, thank God. I thought you were calling me to come back. I saw Jim got shaken up. I just couldn't do it.
All right, that's a great story. I love that one. Okay, you guys ready for our second commercial break? Here we go. Here's our trivia question. Which NFC team has been around the longest? Call 888, or no, we don't want to call. We want to email edward@sportsecon101.com the answer to that question. Which NFC team has been around the longest? Stay with us. Sports Econ 101. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Edward Brown here, along with Russell Jackman and our special guest, Jon Kingdon. Which NFC team has been around the longest?
Man, that's a really hard one. I'm going to say the New York Giants.
Yes, very good. All right.
Well, I was going New York or Green Bay.
No, it was because you had Washington, New York, Green Bay, and oh my God, and the Bears. There we go. Those were the first 4, but New York was first.
Not the Canton Bulldogs, huh?
That cannibal, yeah, that can actually just move later. 1922 or something. So Jon, what are your feelings about like this whole? Well, it's been a couple of years now. Them moving to Las Vegas. That change anything? Or I mean, I guess when you're scouting, you're still scouting.
You mean as a team? Well, I thought about it, and again, I wasn't there when they moved, but I think one of the things, if I was back there, the thing I would have done was find the security guards at all the hotels, or someone who really knows what's going on, and give each of them a couple of season tickets, and have them say, look, if we get any of our players are doing things untoward or that shouldn't be done, that you need to let us know. Here's a couple of tickets, let us have it. And they've had, various incidents, the wide receiver Rug, who was driving 150 miles an hour at 2 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
Killed, and they had other incidents. And the other thing that I would have done, and I'll throw this, I mentioned earlier, Mike Mayock had been the personnel director. They brought him over from ESPN when John Gruden was there, and they drafted players that didn't have a lot of good character. And, a kid out of Ohio State that had a lot of issues. And then they had him on video when he's with the Raiders and he's flashing a gun and such. I think scouting, when you're in Vegas, I think you really have to put a little more emphasis on character, because there's so many more things you're going to be exposed to back there that are really tempting. So
how do you do that? Like for yourself, when you're director, of scouting, you interview the families, interview friends, what goes on?
What we do is we're dealing obviously with the guys at the school, and they will, they've had these guys for 4 years. The trainers have dealt with them. They know them really well. The strength coaches know them really well. The contact guys. And when I said they know them really well, I'll give you an example. Just an example. Deshaun Jackson. It was a receiver out of Cal, first round talent. Some games you couldn't. They couldn't stop him. He was really great, and he had some games he was off. But in talking, to the trainers, he said, he's kind of a pain in the neck. We want him to come in at a certain time, and he's always late. And the strength coach, the same kind of thing. We can't count on him coming in. He does what he wants. Now his senior year, he's doing what we want, but he's just doing it for the scouts, that kind of thing. And and you got all that background. And again, a solid first round talent. He went in the second round to Philadelphia. Now, to his credit, I think somebody said to him, that's why he went in the second round. And he had a very good career, and he played very well that way. So we do as much. We used to send questionnaires to high school coaches, their high school coaches, which gave us some background. And just to go up, we drafted there was a guy who was a fullback at Missouri. He said, and the guy wrote, I really thought he'd be a better linebacker. And Al saw it and got really excited, and we signed him as a free agent. In fact, the guy was a fullback, and his agent said, well, this team really likes him as a fullback. And we said, if you liked him so much as a fullback, they should have drafted him. But I'm telling you, Al Davis likes this guy. We will make a commitment to him. And he did. And I'm sorry, I blanked. He played very well for us. And you may remember, he went to the Rams as a free agent after a few years with us. He made the tackle that saved the Super Bowl win for them.
Oh yeah, against the Titans. Yeah.
Yeah, and I blanked out his name.
I'm blanking on that too, but yeah, that was.
But that was a background thing we got from his high school coach, which and we got a lot of background stuff. It was a form that we created, and it really was good. We found some negative stuff about guys and such.
Yeah.
But we would like, okay, here's another one that's sort of, here's Jamarcus Russell. A lot of issues.
Oh yeah.
Now Bruce Kebrick, again, he'd been going to LSU for 30 years, knew everybody there, and talked to everybody there down to the equipment guy. And they said, he's not an evil guy. He's not a bad person. You got to get someone to wake him up. You got to get someone to take him to class, someone to get him to practice, someone to make sure he does his work, all of those things. Yeah. And, that's, and when he comes to the NFL and gets this big contract, that was it. He just, and I think in his mind, he quit. All right, I've reached my goal, because I got a big contract, that kind of thing. So, and we got ignored. And I'll give, Lane Kiffin was the head guy, and it was a very good personnel guy. And he was adamantly opposed to him. And in fact, the guy we had really pushed was Calvin Johnson, the receiver that went to Detroit, who was just amazing.
Yeah.
And, but if you watched film on Jamarcus, I mean, he was as talented as basically any quarterback you could find. And, but, things change, where Al, another fact, Al was a very powerful, strong man in his time, and he could really reach these players. And when he got to Jamarcus, Al didn't have the strength, and he couldn't move around a lot. He couldn't reach this guy.
I wonder what would happen if, because a lot of times when like he said, he reached his goal, and probably a lot of it had to do with money. And so it's like, what would happen if you did like the old days where it was like, you start off at a basic thing and then you just keep getting incentives as you do well.
No,
versus just,
it would have been great for him. Now,
yeah,
the probably the greatest contribution that Jamarcus made to the National Football League was because his contract was so outlandishly high. They
yeah.
put in a rookie cap. I mean, they're still making a lot of money, but nothing like the crazy thing that Jamarcus got. So that was a big contribution. So I think
Remind me, how
the
much did he get? It was like 100 million or something ridiculous.
well, it was like guaranteed 35 million. I mean, he's walking. This guy didn't come from a particularly affluent background, and so he's got $35 million. And we write about him a lot in the book, and it's like he didn't really understand money. And in
Yeah.
fact, we had a guy who was in charge of our chartered planes, and he told me Jamarcus came up to him and said, I'd like to buy a private jet. And and this guy, to his credit, said, "Don't do it." He'd probably been broke by now. I mean, those guys don't buy a private jet, and he didn't do it. And I assume he's got a few bucks left. He's down in Louisiana, like an assistant high school coach. But he didn't. He wasn't a particularly. We had a guy, George Karras, was our pro personnel director, and he loved cars. And I was walking with him. We were at training camp, and he said, "Look at that car. It's a Bentley." I said, "Yeah, it's a really good looking car." He says, "Yeah, it's Jamarcus's car, and it's dirty." So that sort of symbolized a little bit that he didn't quite understand, and he's come out, well, the team did,
Yeah,
passing the buck and such. But,
sure.
he could have gone. We weren't a very strong team, leadership wise that way. But when we were a very good team, and a strong team, and you had a strong coach, you could bring in, like you said, a John Matuzak, and he'll follow what you're doing, and any number of other players that were sort of edgy. Now, just another example, we brought in Randy Moss, and
Mhm.
Randy is a front runner. I mean,
Yeah.
unbelievably talented.
Yeah.
But if he didn't see, there's a chance that he would quit on you. And so when he went to New England was at a point where the Raiders were in like the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
They would bring in guys. Corey Dillon was a running back that was a pain in the neck in Cincinnati. He went to New England and played very well. And Randy Moss really, went to New England, and he saw they're winning. I'm going to do it their way. And then this is interesting. So, like the third year he's there, they win this big game, and Randy goes, he says, "Yeah, but they got to redo my contract. I'm not happy here." Bing, 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 bing. And they cut him. And I remember Al said, "Do you believe that they cut Randy Moss, that Belichick did it?" I said, "Yeah, as long as he toed the line, he's going to be there. But if he's going to be a distraction, he's not going to put up with it." So,
Yeah.
but if you're going to bring a guy like that in, not Moss or Dillon or whoever, these edgy guys, and you've got a strong team with good leadership and you're successful, then they'll toe the line and play well for you.
Yeah, very interesting how for one team player can play just terribly and then
Sure.
go to another team and play really well. I wonder, being a scout, do you ever, people offer you bribes, or I got to think that these guys hey, listen, I really need to get my son on the team. I think, tell us some background stuff with parents.
No, I'm
I'm not saying you accepted it. I'm just saying that I got to think that.
Well, no, they're really, coaches will maybe recommend players, but, and I might, if there's someone I really respected and such, I might, give a guy another look and such, but, you put your name on the line, and this is not quite what you're talking about, but there was our team doctor asked me if I could talk to the father of a player at USC. And so I called, the guy called me. I said, "Yeah, happy to talk about the guy." And the player was like at best a seventh rounder, more like a free agent. So the father called me and said, "Where do you think my son's going to go?" I said, "Well, there's 32 teams, and I'll be honest with you, I have him as a late rounder, more like a free agent guy." "Oh, I said, where do you think he's going to go?" "Well, I think like the second or third round." I said, "Well, look, there's 32 teams, just takes one."
Yeah.
And so but I explained to him this and this. He said, "Well, he's probably not getting a look there at USC because they got." I said, "That's not true. Each team probably spends 2 scouts in there. They probably send the personnel director, maybe the general manager goes in. So he's being looked at. But he's going back and forth. And I really think, I said, like, just do one thing for me. Don't have a draft day party. Because there's so many guys that have those parties and the kid thinks he's in the first and he goes, and it's just the most depressing thing. Anyway, so he wasn't drafted. He went to the Jets as a free agent. And he was on the practice squad and he was active for like 5 games and then he was out of the league. But, those are the kind of things that, there's something like that. I will admit to sort of taking a bribe. Okay. This is what happened. And so we need it. We have our mini camp and you don't have to, you could bring players in that weren't signed. Normally, you can't bring it unless so there's some kid from Cal Davis calls up and I looked and he played linebacker. I didn't know anything about the kid. And he, and George Karras, bring him to camp. Okay, we'll bring him to camp. So the father, the dad was from Oakland and he was worked in some kind of a city job. He said, that's so nice. And he gave me 2 tickets to Circus du Soleil.
Yeah. Okay.
I said, all right. So they bring the kid into the camp and he's awful. And our linebacker coach, Dave Adolph, that's the worst player I've ever seen in a camp. So I called and I said, look, and so we let him go. And the dad goes, oh, no. Can you just, because he ran terribly. So I said, we'll run you in a 40, just you and me. We'll go out there one day. And if he runs a 40 and 4.6, and he couldn't do it in a million years, we'll do it. I only did it because he had given me 2 tickets to Circus Soleil. And he ran badly, and that was the end of that. That was as close as I came to taking you call a bribe.
All right, here's our last trivia question here. In what city did the Carolina Panthers play their inaugural season in 1996? That's our trivia question. All right, stay with us. Sports Econ 101. We'll be right back with some closing comments. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Russell Jackman and our special guest, Jon Kingdon. All right, guys. Now you each have gotten one question correctly. Let's see if you know the answer to this one. In what city did the Carolina Panthers play their inaugural season in 1996?
I'm counting on Russ on this one, but I would just throw out Chapel Hill.
Russell, what do you think?
I thought it was Charlotte, so I didn't know they didn't play in
their inaugural season in 1996. They played in Clemson, South Carolina. All right. So now you guys are 1-1. So when we have Jon back on in a few weeks, Jon's got a lot of good economic side that we didn't even get a touch on with the NIL situation and how the cornerbacks are making so much money and the running backs are not. But we're going to cut out for our thoughts for the day. So you ready for this? So I visited a mental hospital and I asked the director what the criteria are for defining whether or not a patient should be institutionalized. And the doctor says, well, we fill up the bathtub and then we offer a teaspoon, a teacup, and a bucket to the patient and ask them to empty the bathtub. I said, I understand. A normal person would use the bucket as it's bigger than the spoon or the teacup. The doctor said, no, a normal person would pull the drain plug. So do you want a bed by the wall or near the window?
That's great.
I thought that one was pretty good. Yeah. I like that. All right, Jon Kingdon, former director of college scouting for back then the Oakland Raiders. Did you also go to LA too?
Yeah, Oakland, yeah. LA, Oakland, yeah.
Okay. Just not Las Vegas.
But
maybe they'll get you back on again.
No, but
all right. Yeah. Okay, tune in next week to Sports Econ 101. We're going to be discussing sports topics from a business perspective and asking more sports trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm Edward Brown. We're wishing you the best of investing. I keep doing it. I have another show called The Best of Investing, but we'll see you next week. So long.
Adios.